Christmas Day, 1914. Dear Mother.
My darling Meg.
My good friend Charles. My dear sister Janet.
It is 2 in the morning, and most of our men are asleep in their dugouts.
But I couldn't sleep before writing to you of the wonderful events of Christmas Eve.
In truth, what happened seems almost like a fairy tale. If I hadn't been through it myself, I wouldn't believe it.
Just imagine, when you and the family sang carols before the fire there in London, I did the same with enemy soldiers here on the battlefields of France.
As I wrote before, there has been little serious fighting of late. The first battles of the war left so many dead that both sides have held back until replacements could come from home. So we have mostly stayed in our trenches and waited.
But what a terrible waiting it's been. Knowing that any moment an artillery shell might land and explode beside us in the trench, killing and maiming several men. And in daylight, not daring to lift our heads above the ground for fear of a sniper's bullet.
And the rain, it has fallen almost daily. Of course, it collects right in our trenches, and we must bail it out with pots and pans. And with the rain has come mud, a good foot or more deep.
It splatters and cakes everything, and constantly sucks at our boots. One new recruit got his feet stuck in it, and then his hands too when he tried to get out. Just like that American story of the tar baby.
Through it all, we couldn't help feeling curious about the German soldiers across the way. I mean, after all, they faced the same dangers we did, and slogged about in the same muck.
And what's more, their first trench was only 50 yards away from ours. Between us lay no man's land, bordered on both sides by barbed wire, yet they were close enough. We sometimes heard their voices.
Of course, we hated them whenever they killed our friends. But other times we joked about them and almost felt we had something in common.
And now, it seems, they felt the same.
Just yesterday morning, Christmas Eve day, we had our first good freeze. Cold as we were, we welcomed it because at least the mud froze solid.
Everything was tinged white with frost, while a bright sun shone over all. Perfect Christmas weather.
During the day, there was little shelling or rifle fire from either side. And as darkness fell on our Christmas Eve, the shooting stopped entirely.
Our first complete silence in months. We hoped it might be the promise of a peaceful holiday, but we didn't count on it. We were told the Germans might attack and try to catch us off guard.
I went to my dugout to rest, and lying on my cot, I must have drifted asleep. All at once, my friend was shaking me awake, saying, "Come and see! See what the Germans are doing!" Well, I grabbed my rifle, stumbled out into the trench, and stuck my head cautiously above the sandbags.
I have never seen a stranger or more lovely sight. Clusters of tiny lights were shining all along the German line, left and right, as far as the eye could see.
What is it, I asked in bewilderment, and someone answered, Christmas trees.
And so it was. The Germans had placed Christmas trees in front of their trenches, lit by candles and lanterns like beacons of goodwill.
And then we heard their voices, raised in song. Stille wie Nacht, heilige Nacht.
This carol may not be very familiar to us in Britain, but one soldier knew it and translated Silent Night, Holy Night. I've never heard one lovelier or more meaningful in that quiet, clear night. It's dark, softened by a first quarter moon.
When the song finished, the men in our trenches applauded. Yes, British soldiers applauding the Germans.
Then one of our own men started singing, and we all joined in. The first Noel, the angel did say.
Well, in truth, we sounded not nearly as good as the Germans with their fine harmonies. But they responded with enthusiastic applause of their own and then began singing, "O Tannenbaum, O Tannenbaum."
And then we replied, "O come, all ye faithful."
But this time they joined in, singing the same words in Latin.
British and German harmonizing across no man's land. I would have thought nothing could be more amazing. But what came next was so.
"English, come over," we heard one of them shout. "You no shoot, we no shoot."
There, in the trenches, we looked at each other in bewilderment. And then one of us shouted jokingly, "You come over here."
To our astonishment, we saw two figures rise from the trench, climb over the barbed wire, and advance unprotected into no man's land.
One of them called, "Send officer to talk."
I saw one of our men lift his rifle to ready, and no doubt others did the same. But our captain called out, "Hold your fire!" Then he climbed out and went to meet the Germans halfway.
We heard them talking, and a few minutes later the captain came back with a German cigar in his mouth. "We've agreed there will be no shooting before midnight tomorrow," he announced. "But sentries are to remain on duty, and the rest of you stay alert."
Across the way, we could make out groups of 2 or 3 men starting out of the trenches and coming toward us.
Then some of us were climbing out too, and in minutes more, there we were in no man's land, over 100 soldiers and officers of each side, shaking hands with men we'd been trying to kill just hours before.
Well, before long the bonfire was built, and around it we mingled. British khaki, German gray. I must say, the Germans were the better dressed with fresh uniforms for the holiday.
And only a couple of our men knew German, but more of the Germans knew English. I asked one of them why that was. Thank you. Because many have worked in England, he said. Before all this, I was a waiter at Hotel Cecil. Perhaps I waited at your table. Perhaps you did, I said laughingly.
One German told me he had a girlfriend in London and that the war had interrupted their plans for marriage. I told him, "Don't worry, we'll have you beat by Easter. Go back and marry the girl." He laughed at that. Then he asked if I'd send her a postcard he'd give me later. And I promised I would, of course.
Another German had been a porter at the Victoria station. He showed me a picture of his family back in Munich. His eldest sister was so lovely. I said I would like to meet her someday. He beamed and said he would like that very much and gave me his family's address.
Even those who could not converse could still exchange gifts. Our cigarettes for their cigars, our tea for their coffee, our corned beef for their sausage. Badges and buttons from uniforms changed owners. And one of our lads, well, he walked off with the infamous spiked helmet.
And I, myself, traded a jackknife for a leather equipment belt, a fine souvenir to show when I get home.
Newspapers too changed hands, and the Germans howled with laughter at ours. They assured us that France was finished and Russia nearly beaten too.
We told him that that was nonsense. And then one of them said, "Well, you believe your newspapers and we'll believe ours."
Well, clearly they are lied to. Yet, after meeting these men, I wonder how true our own newspapers have been.
These are not the savage barbarians we've read so much about. They're men with homes, families, hopes and fears, principles, and yes, love of their own country.
In other words, men like ourselves.
Why are we led to believe otherwise?
As it grew late, a few more songs were traded around the fire, and then all joined in for it. I'm not lying to you. Auld Lang Syne.
Then we parted with promises to meet again tomorrow.
And even some talk of a football match.
I was just starting back to the trenches when another German, an older German, clutched my arm. "My God," he said, "why can't we have peace and all go home?" I told him gently that you must ask your emperor. Then he looked at me searchingly. "Perhaps, my friend, but we also must ask our hearts."
And so, dear mother,
My dear wife,
Dear friend,
Dear sister,
tell me, has there ever been such a Christmas Eve in all history?
and what does it all mean? This impossible befriending of enemies.
for the fighting here, of course, it means regrettably little. Decent fellows these soldiers be, but they follow orders, and we do the same.
besides, we are here to stop the army and send them home. And never could we shirk that duty.
Still, one cannot help imagine what would happen if the spirits shown here were caught by the nations of the world.
Of course, there would be disputes.
But what if our leaders were to offer well wishes in place of warnings?
Songs in the place of slurs.
Presents in place of reprisals.
Wouldn't war end all at once?
All nations say they want peace.
Yet, on this Christmas morning, I wonder if we want it quite enough.
Yours truly,
Yours, always,
Sincerely,
With all my love.
John.
Andrew.
Philip.
Tom.